Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today's is a good one. I recently got a question from a viewer who specifically asked me what makes bass behavior change, meaning what are some of the factors that affect bass behavior? And this is one of those questions that there are so many different answers that I can relate to this, that I can state based on season, based on time of day, based on forage. There's a lot of different things that affect the bass behavior. But having said that, in my opinion, there is one main thing that affects bass behavior. And when you take this one thing into account, what you recognize is how important it is to fishing, not just bass, but to all fish that are out there, and honestly, to most of life in this world comes down to this one thing. So I'm going to talk about this biggest impact to bass behavior. Before I do share that with you, you know I've got to do a little housework here where I'm going to let you know that I've got some one-on-one lessons you can sign up for. I do a bunch of lake breakdowns that you can purchase if you're looking for help on your local lakes. I've got a members only channel if you're looking for more content from me. And most importantly, guys, if you watch my videos on a somewhat regular basis, hit that subscriber button. That would be great. That just tells me that you're out there watching and you enjoy the videos for tips like this. And this is a big tip. This is a tip that really plays into every fishing technique. Every time you hit the water, it has an impact. And the biggest factor, in my opinion, to bass behavior is sunlight. The sunlight dictates everything. And let me explain this to you. I'm going to break it down in terms of like the yearly cycle of a bass. So once you're in the winter time, right? So you've got winter out. The fish are in a very lethargic state of mind. They're not feeding much because the water temperatures are cold. The fish are still looking for warmth. They are cold-blooded creatures. Therefore, any slight change in water temperature, I'm talking a half a degree, can have an impact on bass location. Well, during the winter months, the easiest way to find warm water is to find sun exposed banks or banks that have a little bit of wind blowing in that have warmer water. Generally speaking, they're going to be sun exposed banks, or that warmer water is going to be generated by the sun. Pretty straightforward, nothing huge to that, but it gets better, guys. So then you start talking about getting into the pre spawn phase. The bass are going to be looking for what? They're looking for that warmest water still, but they're going to start looking for areas where they may want to spawn. So when they're staging for the pre-spawn, generally speaking, some of the best areas that you can fish are isolated targets that are absorbing sunlight. A stump, a boulder, a dock, things that warm up fast. Why? Because the bass are sitting right tight to them so that they can warm up and start preparing for the spawn. Then what do they go do? Then they go to actually spawn. Well, how do they choose a place to spawn? Yeah, bottom composition is important, but you know what the first thing is that's the most important? They need a place that has some sunlight. If you've got an area that is completely void of sunlight, they're not going to spawn there. Why? Because they need sunlight to hatch their eggs. That sunlight provides warmth and helps hatch the eggs. So anytime you're looking for a spawning fish, you need to find a place that's got a little bit of sunlight at a minimum. So what happens? Those eggs go ahead and hatch, and then you're talking about fry. The fry are generally going to position based on sunlight as well. Most of the time, they're not just going to hang in direct sunlight. Now, they still do need to absorb that warmth to help them to grow and develop those little eggs into fry, into minnows, and then grow up into develop bass. But the point here is, generally speaking, just like a bass, if you've got sunlight, the bass are going to position based on that sunlight, the fry position based on that sunlight as well. So if you've got direct sunlight, a lot of times they're going to be looking for a little bit of shade. Maybe it's a dock post, maybe it's under a dock, maybe it's a weed clump. The point is they will still position based on that. So then what? After you've got your spawn, post spawn, then the fish start going into summer mode, right? Well, what do they do in the summer mode? A lot of times they spread out, but you know what dictates how deep a lot of those fish go? The sunlight, right? Like the sunlight, it's all about light penetration because the light penetration If you're on a super muddy body of water, maybe you've only got 6 feet of light penetration. Maybe you've got 20. Maybe you've got 40 feet of light penetration. Well, what does that do to the bass? Well, generally speaking, it does a couple of things. It will help set up where those fish are at based on the plankton, right? I've talked about this before. The plankton in the water, if it's phytoplankton, it needs sunlight, right? And the phytoplankton is the basis of the food chain. So if you're talking about where to find bass, you need to recognize how dirty the water is. Generally, in dirtier water, the phytoplankton can't absorb sunlight at deeper levels, so it stays up higher in the water column, which means the fish are going to be in that same range. Then you got to think, okay, well, if I'm on a gin clear body of water and I've got light penetration significantly deeper, where the phytoplankton drops to 40 feet or 35 feet, whatever it is, and the shad are down at that level, well, that's great. But what do we recognize happens every evening and every morning? People are like, why are all those little fish flickering on the surface? Well, those are the shad that are up higher feeding on the phytoplankton, because during low light periods, the phytoplankton all rise to the surface because it's looking for that sunlight that it had when it had good light penetration. So the point here is you need to recognize that the bait are moving around based on the phytoplankton, which is moving around based on light penetration. So the point is when you're talking about something that dictates fish movement, the sun is key in all of this. You want to keep going, we go into the fall months. Well, what generally happens in that period? You get a lot of shad migration that moves into the backs of the pockets because they're looking for a little bit warmer water. Again, the bass start looking for warmer water. So the whole cycle, the whole food chain cycle, the whole life cycle of the bass evolve around light and sunlight penetration. So from that standpoint, if you're going to ask me what's the biggest factor in terms of bass behavior, it's sunlight. Sunlight really comes down to it. There's a lot of things that you need to recognize how fish position based on the time of year, based on whether you've got sun or don't have sun. In most situations, the more sunlight you have, the deeper the bass are going to go, or the thicker the cover they're going to look for to get shade to get out of the that sunlight. A lot of reason why those bass go deep is because they're trying to get out of the direct sunlight. But having said that, if you're talking about the springtime again, a lot of people think when you have warm spring day that the fish and solid sunlight, the fish are always going to be in a mat. Well, you'll have a period where the fish are under the mat to get out of that direct sunlight, but you also have a period where they actually swim out of that mat and use that sunlight to start their spawning process, which is probably going to be in much more sunlight versus being in those shaded areas. Uh, those fish go deep at the same for one of the same reasons. They're trying to get out of that direct sunlight. So the point here is you need to recognize based on the time of year, based on what stage of the life cycle the fish are in, that sunlight affects it all. But we've known this for a long period of time, right? We recognize as humans on this planet that sunlight dictates most life on this planet. So it's no different for bass. But yet we very rarely hear people talking about how important sun is. One of the keys to fishing when you don't have sunlight, so you're a low light period or you've got periods of overcast conditions, a lot of times that's when people say fishing is the best. And it is a lot of times because the fish are much more aggressive because they're taking advantage of the low light periods. Sunlight is both a good thing and a negative thing when you're fishing. You just need to recognize how to use it. But if you're out on you're seeing fish cruising on a flat, they may be there to absorb the sunlight and they may be there or may not be there to get away from the sunlight. Just kind of depends on the time of year. But if you're not recognizing that, you're really limiting how productive you can be on the water. So next time you head out fishing, make sure you pay attention to the sunlight. Use it to your advantage. Use it to help locate where the fish are going to be because it will make you a better fisherman. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned. We'll have a new tip video coming out tomorrow for you.